Okay, you're being recorded.
Good. So we are family. We all know each other already. So it's, I'm Hazzan Ramon Tasat. I'm delighted to be able to talk to you about one of my passions in life, which is Tehillim, the Psalms. And we're going to study it together. Feel free. I'm going to give at the very end of kind of like my teachings some time for you to ask questions, to make commentaries. Make sure that if you're not talking, that you're muted, so we don't hear all kinds of extra Tehillim sounds. And so I appreciate that. Let me also say that we are being recorded. So if there is anything that you want to review again, or if you have other questions, I'm going to put on the chat my email address, so you can contact me anytime you want, and be a delight to answer any other questions or anything that you will feel that you need, that you want to know more about it. So we are going to discuss today Psalm 30. But before we do that, I would love to make a little bit of an introduction to what I call in Hebrew Tehillim, translated into English as Psalms. And I wanted to do that first for a grammatical question. You know that the singular of Tehillim would be Tehillah, which means praise. And you would expect that since the word Tehillah ends with a kamatz, a hey or a, that the plural would be ot, right? Like morah, morot, right? And so why is it that Tehillim is in the masculine plural and not in the feminine? And that's for a very good reason, simply because the rabbis wanted to separate this 150 psalms into a body of work that is separate than other tehilot. As you know, for instance, in Shabbat service, tehilot le'el elyon, baruch umborach, right? Those are praises. They are not tehillim, but tehilot. So, and then I wanted to also include tehillim within the corpus, the body of the big biblical Hebrew, by introducing that, saying that Tehillim are part of the Tanakh being an acronym of Taf for Torah, the Nun for Nevi'im or prophets, and the Chaf for Ketuvim, or the writings, those type of writings that came late to the Bible, right? So the rabbis wanted us to be very comfortable with all those writings, so at least to most of them. So very cleverly they separated. They gave us a diet, a spiritual diet, and so of course we study Torah every day. You also we read publicly the Torah. We read it 3 times a week, right? The rabbis say very, very beautifully that we should not be more than 2 days without studying Torah. That's why Shabbat, Mondays and Thursdays. And then you say, well, where is the prophet section, the Nevi'im? I guess you guessed it. Every Shabbat for the Haftarot, they are celebrating the works of the Nevi'im. And then finally, the writings, what we call the more modern work, there are a number of different books that we recite publicly. Of course, we want to study all of them, but some of them have become part of and addressed very cleverly into certain times. For instance, if you are thinking of Purim, Megillat Esther, right? The book of Esther, one of those that are part of this Ketuvim section. Or for Shavuot, Megillat Ruth. For Tisha B'Av, you have is anybody wanting to say something? I don't know. Right, etc., etc. We do Shir Hashirim for the Song of Songs, the Song of Songs for Pesach, and then you say, where is Tehillim? Tehillim is everywhere. Tehillim is actually a source of inspiration for actually almost every time. We say them every day, and we also incorporated them into what is called Psukei de Zimra, or what the Sephardim call it Zemirot, the hymns that Edie knows so well because she always leads us, but also for Kabbalat Shabbat, also Tehillim, and in so many places, including, may I say, at times of mourning, right? If you remember, we have at the time, in the interim time, where the person that has died, it's in that period of transition between the time that he or she passed away to the time that they are buried. We are reciting Tehillim, sort of like to nurture their soul. Yes. So clearly, Tehillim is viewed in the Jewish world as a source of inspiration, as I'm sure it is for all of you, and that's why I love that we are studying it together. After that introduction, let me just say to you that Tehillim is divided into 150 psalms, divided into 5 books. Some, unsurprisingly, call them as compared to the Torah. So the 5 books of the Torah, correct. So so now that we entered more specifically the Tehillim 30, or the book, or the Psalm 30 that you may be familiar with, I'm going to put it up for you. I'm going to share the screen and put it up for you to have. One of the things that I wanted to say is that I strongly believe, I wanted to begin with this psalm that I'm sure is very dear to all of you, because of a particular topic that I think it's very much in our minds, and it's the response to the pandemic. Yes, to the response to the pandemic, the idea that many times, as we are for so many hours and for so many years, like into our homes, if one would have ever told us that we were going to spend so many days inside of our homes, almost like we are prisoners of a place, we have been able to sometimes find ways to uplift ourselves by being home. And sometimes we have become a bit depressed, thinking, when is this coronavirus pandemic ever going to end? And for that, I wanted to offer, right, on the verse Vav or 6, some words that are that for me are central to my life, and I wanted to share them with you. Va'erev yalin bechi velaboker rina. So in other words, every time that I feel a little bit overwhelmed and feeling that I find no solutions to things that are imposed on me, I remember these words. So we may lie down weeping at nightfall, right? Ba'erev, in the evening, I will go to bed crying. Vela boker rina, but at dawn, joy erupts. I wrote as a translation. I think there are many ways to translate. In fact, I recommend that you look at different translations. That the richness of the Hebrew language is that captures so many meanings in so many ways that we can convey these concepts. And then another verse that I find truly meaningful at this time is on verse 12, when we say, Afachta mispedi lemachol li, pitachta saki v'te'azreni simcha. In other words, Afachta, you have turned around my hesped, right? My lament, my mourning, lemachol, to a dance. Pitachta, from the word liftoach, to open. You open for me, saki, my sackcloth, v'te'azreni simcha, and you surrounded me with simcha, with joy. I hope, and I surely wish all of us, especially on this upcoming Gregorian year, that those words will be central also to your lives, and that you will feel that that there is hope at the end of the tunnel. Yes, that we are having the opportunity to transform that which is sad into a moment of joy. And with that, I wanted to come back to the beginning and begin with the koteret, with the title that says Mizmor Shir Chanukat Habayit LeDavid. Now, interestingly enough, not all the traditions recite this title. Sephardim and Eidot HaMizrach, and the Jews from the Middle East, to say it quickly, do not recite these words when they chant or pray Psalm 30 every day. They only use these words for 3 different distinct occasions. One of them, of course, you guess it, because this psalm is also the Psalm 4 that we recite every day of Hanukkah, for the word Hanukat Habayit LeDavid. So that is one of the times, but also Hanukkah means dedication. So if you have the opportunity to dedicate an apartment or a house, you actually recite the psalm, and you include, according to Sephardim and Eidot HaMizrach, you include these words. And then if you are also going to celebrate the creation of a building, like a Bet HaKnesset, like a synagogue, then this is a title that is utilized. Otherwise, they do not say it. I'm just saying nothing is right or wrong, but one of the things that I try to do when I can is to give you the perspective of other traditions. So we know that we have our own, but there are other people that have other ways of doing things. I wanted to also let you know that the Tehillim is, according to tradition, composed by Melech David, but King David, who is actually called in the tradition Ne'im Zemirot Israel, the sweet voice of Israel. Of course, there are many reasons why we know that probably he didn't write all the Psalms. We're not going to get into that right now. But according to the tradition, this is one of the books that he wrote. And it's interesting that even though this is the Psalm that inaugurated, if one wants, the temple with a big T, right, the Bet HaMikdash, he actually did not build it, because if you remember, God did not allow him to do that because of his use of violence, sending Uriah, one of his best soldiers and husband of Bathsheba, to a certain death, in order to make Bathsheba his wife. And so it is his son, King Solomon, who's going to build the temple. But I guess King David, probably according to tradition, none of us know, wanted to leave his imprint and say, even though I am not able to build this temple, at least would I live my imprint in the poetry and the music of it. One of the things that fascinates me, I just always thought about the connections between not only the Psalms, but liturgy in general, and the dialogue of the different generations. You're familiar with this, with the Chachamim, with the sages are discussing Torah and is discussing different books. And it's almost like they talk to each other, right? So for instance, according to some, Shlomo even Gavirol writes Adon Olam, that famous piut, right? Not sure that he wrote it, but some claim that he does. And he talks about what God is, right? And he finished with the words, Be'im ruchi geviati Adonai li velo ira, that if my spirit will decay, I still know that God is with me, and I will not fear. And then somebody in the 14th century, Italy, decided to write Igdal, which is actually what God is not, as opposed to what God is, right? In a way, like saying, how could you dare, Mr. Gavirol, to write a claim that you know what God is when in fact you don't know? So I'm going to give you these 13 principles of faith, and you're going to show you that actually what God is not is here. So this is part of the beauty of the liturgy, and the more that we are entering it, getting in the mud, as one was, we are able to recognize things that happen. So there is another paradigm that is fascinating about this psalm. Some of you may recall that Hanukkah many times happens during Parashat Miketz. Parashat Miketz, if you recall the story of Yosef, right? And look at some of what happens. I'm going to show you this pasuk, this second verse. It says, Aromimcha Adonai ki dilitani velo simachta oivai li. So the translation, you have it in here. By the way, I just simply put here Adonai with an A and with a hey in here, because, and I urge you that if you are printing these materials, and I hope you can have them, is that make sure to be very careful that if you need to dispose of them, right, that then therefore the name of God is not included in full. So Aromimcha, from like I praise you, Adonai. Why do I praise you? The author says, Ki dilitani. Ki dilitani, translated normally as you have lifted me up. But I want to tell you something about this word dilitani. Dilitani, if those of you that are familiar with modern Hebrew, do you know what a bucket is? The word for bucket is dli. Dli. So ki dilitani is like you threw a bucket and I came with the bucket. And if you remember, and then you look at, before I give you the hint, look at verse 4, and when it says, Adonai Elita, you have pulled me up, from the word aliyah, if you remember, but in the hifil, in the causative, you brought me up, you caused me, right, like hashkivenu, make me come back. In the Elita min Sheol nashi, you made me ascend from where? From the Sheol. Sheol, traditionally a place of terrible moments or terrible situation. I was there. I was in Sheol. You pull me up. Now, and what did you do? What did you do? Nafshi chiitani, and you brought my soul, my spirit, my life. Chiitani, you brought it miyordibor, from the pit. So now there you have the full picture of Yosef. First, the dli, the bucket, and then the idea that he's in a bore, in a pit. So I don't know, I have to full confession, vidui, I don't know if King David or anyone else thought about the connection of this, but it's really interesting that this is the psalm that is associated with Hanukkah at a time of Parashat Miketz. So think about it. is, in my opinion, fascinating to look into it. And indeed, it's a bit of a roller coaster, right? Because dalo, the verb from this that I was talking to you about, the drawing up, is drawing water from a well, and then we can extrapolate it and say, how many times did we feel that we were in a pit? How many times, I imagine, because part of the exercise that I want to do with you is not only that we read this as an academic thing, but also that we can extrapolate and say, is it possible, and I'm sure the answer is readily yes, that we at some point we're in that bore, in that pit in our lives, and somehow we were feeling that that we were able to come back, right? And for that, I want to pause and go back to the verse in between the two that I just mentioned. Adonai Elohai shivati elecha vatirpaeni, right? So God, Adonai, shivati elecha, I cried out to you, vatirpaeni, and you healed me, right? And it's fascinating because this verse always reminds me of one moment in Torah that I'm sure you would be very, very, that you will remember vividly. What do I mean? One of the central questions in Torah is, why is it that the children of Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, spent, according to some 240 years, according to others 400 years in slavery in Egypt? How could it be that God allowed this to happen? Any thoughts? I'll just let you comment in case I'll stop that. And do you have any thoughts, any ideas of why this would have happened? You probably studied this, but in case that's meaningful. Marilyn, please unmute yourself and tell us your thoughts.
Yeah. So doesn't it say God heard their cry and then he took them out so they didn't cry?
You won the car. You won the car. Very good. So exactly. So the point is that until the children of Israel, and on chapter 6 of the book of Shemot, cry out, only then we begin to experience, right, the dynamics of getting out of Egypt. Until then, that was not going to happen. In a sense, with the concept of we have to put apart from us to make things happen. Maybe also from I'm not a psychologist, I'm sure somebody here can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I have 25 years of therapy, so I could speak with some authority. So one of the things that I think happens is that when we are able to cry it out, is that we are starting to realize what's happening, right? That we're starting to connect with the metziut, with the reality that before maybe we were negating, that maybe we didn't look into, that we weren't conscious of it. And sometimes half of the solution is to actually become conscious. So Adonai shivati elecha batirpaeni, Adonai Elohai shivati elecha batirpaeni. So I guess the idea is that yes, God is our doctor in the sense that when I realized what was going on with me, I was able to search for solutions. Until then, I couldn't, because I didn't know that this was even happening to me, right? And so I invite you to think about all this psukim, like I mentioned before. Aromimcha Adonai ki dilitani. I praise you, God, because you have taken me out of the pit, right? And the idea that Chiitani mior gibor, that you have extracted me from the pit. It's not that this happened literally, but there is a feeling many times that we're consumed by sadness, consumed, overwhelmed by our circumstances, and then somehow, some way, we're able to extricate ourselves from that and look into it. So allow me to, and by the way, oh, Ariela, do you have a question, please?
I have a little bit of a problem with that concept.
Tell
Because
me.
I wonder how God would react to the people who do not have the ability to cry out. Not everyone has the cognitive ability to recognize the circumstances that they're in.
I am with you. I guess it's a fantastic question that you're asking, and I can see very well why you do have a problem. I guess what we're trying to look into is, yes, not everybody is able to get out, and in fact, this process, right, of scrutiny that we have to, it's something that one has to develop. If you remember, I want to remind all of you of the whole concept of teshuvah, right? When we go for the Yamim Noraim, and the idea of not only the Aseret Yamei Teshuvah, the 10 days of repentance, but also the whole exercise that we do from the first of the month of Elul all the way to Yom Kippurim, at least as a community. Not that we don't do this in our lives constantly, but the idea that we scrutinize our souls and our lives to look for those things that we can do better. Ariela, is not that we arrive to a place where we say, I'm done. We're never done. We always have something else to build, but the idea of encouraging ourselves not to stay in the pit. And for this, let me explain what I mean. I'm sure you've seen this before, of people that unfortunately find that they, like Ariela was saying, they cannot get out of the pit, or somehow that they don't even know that they have the tools to get out of the pit. And I think as a community, it's super important that we are there for each Kol Israel Arevim Ze Laze. We are responsible for each other, and that we are able to give a hand to others that perhaps are not as successful as we were for social circumstances or any other reasons. Philip, did you want to say something? Or
yeah, I have.
Go ahead.
The question that it's how this all fits together is we are reading the Haftarah with Chanukah. Yosef winds up down in the pit, and then he's brought out of the pit, and he keeps going up and down. That's what I see, and how this all fits in. It's we're talking about Chanukah Habayit LeDavid. The bayit is what's going on in Chanukah is dealing with the temple. But my question is, the question I have is, when we daven in the Sidur, the weekday Sidur, we read regularly in the morning when we do this on Sunday morning. For example, in the morning blessing on page 14 is Psalm 30, which is immediately before we're doing the Kaddish Yatom for the first time. And is that what we're doing here? We're saying a Psalm 30 before we have to say the Kaddish Yatom. We're down in the pit, and this psalm is going to get us out of the pit.
That's so beautiful indeed. let me also connect with that and say that there is another moment that is similar to this one, and Philip maybe expands on your thinking, right? And this is verse 11 when it says, Shema Adonai vechoneni, Adonai yozerli. So here God, right? Here presumably, help me connect in the same way of Shema, right? And to listen, not necessarily to see visually, but to hear what's really going on. Vechoneni, and the word choneni is from the word chen, right? To have grace more than mercy. Vechoneni, and hopefully you'll be my help, right? And then the central part of what Philip was saying on verse 10, Mabetza bedami beriti el shachat, right? What am I gonna gain from my death, from my descent again to the pit? Ayotcha afar hayagid amitecha. Can dust praise you? Can it declare your faithfulness? I translated, and then it resonates for me, if you remember, of the words of the Untane Tokef, Adam yesodo me'afar besofo le'afar, right? That human beings come from dust and return to dust. And I guess the psalm is rebelling and saying, why do you treat me so harshly? Why do you test me so intensely? What would be the gain from my death? And advancing two weeks from now, when we go to Psalm 118, right? When it says, Lo ha-meitim hallelujah. So the dead cannot praise you, God, right? The local your day duma, not that all that go again to the pit. But those of us that live, and this is something so profound that I always found impressive in Judaism. We lechaim tovim, right? In Parashat Re'eh, right? We says Re'eh anochi natati lifnechem. I have given you abracha ve'aklala. I have given you the blessing and the opposite of blessing. Ubacharta b'chaim, immediately, and choose life. And choose life. In other words, as Jews, we are committed to life. Yes, we know that there is the olam haba. Yes, we know that there is the world to come. There are other places where our soul might go, but our commitment is to this world in all its fascination. So thank you, Philip, for that. That was really, really important to bring in. And then I wanted to go into something that I always also find really, really profound. If you look at verse 8, Chet, it says, Adonai birtzoncha mata liareri oz, istarta fanecha ha'iti nivhal. It says, God, for your ratzon, your wish, right? Mata, again, in the causative, in the hifil, la'amod, to stand, the amida, if you remember, right? That we say it while standing. Mata, you made me stand, as that's what we're saying, firm, stand. Lehareri oz. Oz meaning strength. Lehareri from the word har. Har Tzion, right? Lehareri from the mountain. In Israel, they call mountains to what in the United States we may be choosing to call hills, right? Esa einai eleharim. I will lift my eyes to the mountains. We will say to the hills in America, because we have very, very, very pronounced arim. But this is interesting. So you make me feel as if I would become a mighty mountain, right? But I also want to invite you to think that the word Har is also the Har HaMoriah, the famous mountain where what I would like to call the near sacrifice of Yitzhak, the Akedat Yitzhak, that happens in Har HaMoriah. And also the Har HaMoriah is the place where the temple, this temple that we began talking about with a big T, right? The Har Habayit, as they call it also. It also, of course, we also know that this is also sacred for Muslims. Ergo, therefore, what many of the problems of we have having about having one mountain that that is sacred to both nations. And the other connection that I invite you to look for, this Lehareri Oz, for this mountain of strength, is another Har Sinai, right? The Mount Sinai, as we call it, where the Torah is brought by Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher. And so these mountains, right? We become that. We are in some, if you want, magnificent way, we have the potential of becoming a tall mountain of strength, of moral ideas, of civil rights, but that we can aspire for more. We can, and so he says, with your help, God, you have made me stand tall, made me stand with the strength, right? And then the contrast. Histarta fanecha. You have seter, meaning secret. Histarta, something like hiding, right? In fact, if you remember some of the parshanim of the commentators for the book of Esther, right, is that they say, what is it that God is not in the book? Is because God is hidden, right? Histarta fanecha, you have hid your face. Ha'iti nivhal. And when that felt like you have hidden your face, I felt like trembling. And let me see, somebody's saying, oh, I see. Okay, so, and I wanted to say, there is another psalm that we're not going to cover, that is Psalm, I believe, Psalm 51, that says the words, Al taster panecha mimeni. Al taster panecha mimeni. Do not hide your face from me. So one of the things before we go on, and I ask you for your impressions on this, which I think is very powerful, I want to remind you that the word for face in Hebrew is panim. And panim does not have, well, some argue that panim has a singular, but it's not a singular that is used. When we talk about face, we use the word in the plural, panim, or we say that Moshe Rabbeinu met God panim el panim, right? So this idea, or we say Shiva, that the Torah has 70 faces, Shiva panim la Torah, Shivim panim la Torah. So the idea is that there is not one side to a face. And in fact, I could argue that we ourselves, even though we have one face, it has a multiplicity of things. If we look, I'm looking at David with his children, I know when he looks at them, he has certain panim. They're not the same panim that when he looks at me, right? Or when you look, when Edie looks at her students, right? She has panim that again doesn't have the same panim that when she talks to me. They are different panim, right? And Rabbi Rosenwasser has multiplicity of panim because he needs to cater to every one of you and every one of us, and he's able to adjust, and his panim are actually connected to each one of us. So the first thing is that the idea of the multiplicity of expression for our panim, the idea that we are not only one. We are not the same when we are feeling like a mountain, lehareri oz, and we are different when we feel that God's face, or I should say God's faces, seem to be hidden. So I want to stop for a second. I'm looking at the clock because I'm quite aware that we're going to stop in a second, so you can ask more questions if you want. And so then in a few minutes, we can go to Minyan. But have you ever experienced the sensation that God's faces have been hidden from you?
If I may, just one comment, very, very brief, because it could allow itself for long, but the idea that panim is also the same word as inside, pnim. So the faces are the insides, what we carry inside, and obviously there is a multiplicity of things that we carry at different times. Just that. Back to Hazzan.
No, thank you so much. Absolutely. So recognizing the time, I wanted to conclude with something that is always very powerful to me. Let me just point it in here. These words, Elecha Adonai Ekra, I call to you, God. Vel Adonai et Hanan, and I plea to you, God. And I wanted to end with some music. And if you know this melody, please feel free to sing with me from the muteness of your homes. Elecha Adonai Ekra, Vel Adonai et Hanan. Elecha Adonai Ekra, Vel Adonai et Hanan. Shema Adonai v'choneni, Adonai ezeh ozer li. Shema Adonai v'choneni, Adonai ozer li. Shema Adonai v'choneni, Adonai ozer li. Shema Adonai v'choneni, Adonai So hopefully, indeed, we will be able to have the capacity to reach to God in any of the moments of our lives when we can do that. And that hopefully we will feel that and that God is close to us, and that we are helped. And I want to spend like maybe a couple minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, hearing your impressions. And so then we're gonna continue later. So please feel free to let me know how all this resonates with you. And yes, silence is also a way of recognizing the enormity of our relationship. Many times it occurs to me that we don't talk about our relationship with God very often. We lose that part. It's almost not necessarily that we all agree on what God, who is the partner that we have. This God is personal to each of us, but yet that we can cultivate that relationship. Yes, cultivate that relationship. So let me just, yes?
Sure. So I thank you, Hazzan Tasat, for sharing this with us and for helping set the mood. One thing I was reflecting on is, as you mentioned, this is the psalm that was written or used for dedication of the temple. And I think, at least for me, one would expect that when you read a psalm or a song or something that was written for dedication of the house of God, it would be, it would sound more like an ashrei type of thing, or like a praise God's glorious deeds and joy, all those, but the power of it instead being about, God comforting me at the depths and raising me up and being my support, taking mercy on me. It's such a powerful image or language for the idea of what we might say when dedicating a point that's the pinnacle of our religious and existential, time as Jews. Very different from other cultures who again would write something that's much more of a glorifying thing. And so I appreciated your introduction of the context of kind of when it comes at time of year, the connection to Hanukkah, to Joseph's story, and enriching that heritage of how there's thought and there's a meaning behind it that might seem counterintuitive at first glance. So thank you for taking the time to walk us through that.
You're so welcome. It's really for me so meaningful to be able to speak to you. I wanted to simply say, as we're going to conclude, that next week I hope you can join me again, as we're going to be exploring Psalm 23, that many of you have even probably recited at school, and we'll see some of the differences and the different views and radical ideas that are included in the psalm. I hope that this pleases, that it reaches your hearts, and I hope that it's a way to stimulate your cultivation of the Tehillim, of the Psalms. There are so many treasures. When I had to choose, discussing with both David and Rabbi Rosenwasser which Psalms to include, it was a very difficult task. But I felt that Psalm 30, especially at a time of darkness, truly, when the day closes so fast on us, that it was an important psalm to discuss. Thank you so much, everybody. Beshir v'kol toda, with a voice full of gratitude. Thank you for your support.
Thank you, Hazzan. I'm going to stop the recording now so we can feel free to talk without being recorded, and we'll go into Minyan in just a few minutes. Michelle is here. She's going to do tech support for tonight's service.
Now you can really say what you mean, now that we are not being